and welcome to Beyond the Pixel, Episode 4. I'm technical designer Luis Fernando Sandrin, and joining me as always, digital artist Ken Ha.
Hey.
Hey Ken, so we got some stuff to swing through, huh?
Yes, some stuff to swing through. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite films, probably of all time. It's a high watermark for me right now in terms of animation, storytelling, definitely design. It's Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. I'm gonna do a little bit of a breakdown and an analysis on the technical animation side about what they did in this film that was so special. And then I also wanted to go into a bit of the initial conceptual phases, because it was actually a very interesting project, and it was such a unique type of movie that I think it really warrants like a look into how they were able to develop this specific art style, because it's a whole technical pipeline that they had to go through. And then we're gonna get into some of your games that you've picked, right? One of them I have actually really wanted to play. The first of your topics. Do you wanna tell everyone what it is?
Sure. I think the one you're talking about is Hard Space.
Yes, Hard Space. Yeah.
Hard Space Shipbreakers. I'm gonna wrap around to the end on that one. In the middle, as we take a little break, I want to talk about sort of the dead spaces that we have in games sometimes, where games let themselves breathe. And I recently played an indie game that was really hardcore about having that emptiness, and it influenced the game in an interesting way.
What do you mean that emptiness? Like, sorry, when you said Dead Space, I thought about the Dead Space game.
No, that's a different conversation.
Okay, yeah.
I mean more like Dead Spaces in when the game doesn't ask you to do anything, and you are meandering, and you're trying to figure out, well, what's going on here. And this game, Arrest of a Stone Buddha, an indie game, there's some interesting things with that.
Okay, cool.
But first, let's hit the Spider-Man. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Due to our not wanting to get DMCA'd, we put together a bit of like a PowerPoint presentation that you can bring up here. And it's just pretty much a few photos and screen grabs that I grabbed that will kind of highlight what they've done in the series. So first of all, you saw this movie, right?
Absolutely.
I was actually super late in watching it. It's actually super. I watched it 3 years after it came out, or like
wow.
Yeah. I think it's
so this year.
I watched it maybe a year and a few months ago. Like it's pretty recently.
It came out 2018, no?
So maybe a couple of years. The time frame might be wrong, but I had a lot of other artists tell me that this film was amazing. And actually, the reason I didn't watch it wasn't because I didn't want to. I'm a massive Spider-Man fan, but I just never found the time to sit down and really like. I knew I wanted to enjoy it, right? So I had to like plan time where I'm just watching it and just focusing on it.
I gotcha.
But when I finally saw it, man, it freaking blew me away. Holy! I think it's the best Marvel movie, like hands down right now. Period. Best
definitely
superhero
trending in
movie,
that direction.
At least in my opinion, and also just how much they really push the boundaries in so many different ways. And and I'll get into a little bit of this, but the film takes a lot of risks, like not just like the kind of risks in terms of storytelling, but they take a lot of risks with the whole animation process. I mean, you've seen it. They do a very unique blend of actual 3D, but they accentuate it with style, like classic comic book styling. Like adding in halftones and stuff. So I wanted to get a little bit into what they did specifically in terms of the animation and rendering. So if we go to the next slide here.
Bam.
So the first thing that most people will notice is this movie. If you download this movie or can stream it, if you pause at any moment, it's every frame is a painting. And this isn't something that you can do with all movies, because most movies, especially with like real life movies, they have blur on. Just the natural blur that our eyes kind of sees translated through the camera. But in Spiderverse they don't do any actual blurring, and instead to get this effect for depth of field, they pretty much do a technique called chromatic aberration. Have you ever heard of this technique before?
Usually in games, yes.
Yeah, so it's gotten a little bit more popular in games. Essentially, what it is if you imagine that like this is a pixel, right? And then what they do is they split that pixel into two, and then they hue color shift it while offsetting it a little bit. So you can kind of imagine what it looks like. It's the same thing what it looks like when you watch a 3D film. That red and blue kind of. If you watch it without the glasses, you'll see two images overlaid each other, a red one and then a blue one, right?
Sort of like our logo.
Kind of exactly like our logo, actually. Probably heavily inspired by this movie because I took a lot. I took a lot of from this movie when I did an earlier analysis on it. So what they did was that if you look over in Miles' shoulder, the reason I highlighted this particular part was because Miles is sharp and in the middle here, like on the left side. And then if you look over his shoulder, you see the background, and you can see that chromatic aberration that they did. And that allows your eye to mimic the type of focusing that happens for when you see something that's blurry and you see something that's close. Because when your eye focuses in on a particular distance, maybe someone that you're talking to, in this case, like maybe where Miles is sitting, everything else becomes a bit blurry. And you'll notice this is the same thing with like digital cameras. They have a specific focal range that you're always tuning based on how far the subject is from the camera. And then things that are further or closer within that range will be a bit blurry. And then use that same level of like kind of shift, but they just have it so that they shift the overall image instead. So what this allows is that every image, there's none of that actual kind of weird smudging that kind of happens when you do it with traditional film. So if you pause a regular movie, you'll see that like there's a lot of frames where everything looks just completely smeared and you don't really know what's going on. That's because they're trying to reconstruct the way your eye would see in real life, because your eye won't be able to properly capture everything in perfect, like, crisp frame by frame by frame. The human eye works in terms of it blends it all together and it gives you like this idea of motion. So because this film didn't do that, it had to do so many things to compensate, because blur is such an important part of how we perceive any kind of visual media. So if you take it away, you have to put in a whole bunch of things to compensate so that it still looks good. Because if you just did this in any other film and you took away the blur, it looks extremely strange and things start to begin to look a little sometimes like out of proportions. Things might look a little too big, look a little too small, and it just looks odd overall. If you go to the next frame, this will be another example of this type of blurring that they do. But instead of just blurring with chromatic aberration, you see on the left side here, this is the image that ended up in the film, and on the right side is the original like pre-post production image of the 3D scene.
So in the left image, there's a subway train and what looks like a filter overlaid on top of it.
Yeah, so this is a combination. Part of it is the chromatic aberration that we just talked about, and then another is something called like a halftone. It resembles if you ever looked at newsprint, the way that they print the images, it has like these little raised bumps because they do dot inking, and
Gotcha.
so it's just trying to get the aesthetic feel of a comic book. But what they do is that what regular depth of field does is essentially blurs things in the background, making all the shapes simpler, and making things a bit harder to see. And so what this film does is that it decides to just stylize things in the background instead, and manually simplify those shapes, right? To use in tandem with the fact that they don't actually have blur on, right?
Gotcha.
So because they took blur out, they had to replace it with these other techniques. But because they are specific about the techniques they replace, they use it to like stylize things to make it feel like a comic book, or to other storytelling effects. We'll get a bit more into it with the other examples. If you go to the next frame,
a quick question before we move over, because I'm actually curious about this. In this right photo here, with the train without the filter on top of it. Is that a photograph or is that an actual painting?
So that's a 3D model. With although the textures that they use, sometimes they use photo textures because there's a lot of materials here that are rendered like realistically, like the metal is rendered realistically.
Yeah.
There's a bit of an example later on, but because like if you look inside the train's interior, you'll notice that it's a very simplified, almost just like a 2D drawing. Like they do this all the time. They don't actually need to fill the depth because they know the background is going to be so far away. They don't have to model in depth this train. And so I guess you can call them developers or animators, the team that worked on this, they talked a lot about this because on one hand, a lot of people praised them for how ingenious this idea was, but they also said because it was much more of a like a logistics thing because it saved them so much work in terms of having to actually model things or detail things in the background. Yeah. Anyways, so this is the same shot. It's a little darker on the left side because they're trying to this particular screenshot's highlighting Miles on the right there, but essentially what they do is that they use it to make the audience focus exactly where they want them to focus, even though the scene is quite busy or they need to showcase a very messy environment. They use it as a tool to direct the audience's eye specifically to where the story really should be. So all the sharpness will usually revolve around our characters, especially our foreground characters.
So this is like a panning shot.
This is just a I'm actually calling it a wide angle shot. I love the composition of this because in this part of the story, Miles is just, I believe he just found out, or Peter just died. I could be wrong in the exact timing. So he's feeling like small and kind of insignificant. So they have him off in the side of the frame because he's not a major player in the story just yet. Yeah. So another thing that this film did, so this style that they had, the reason that they wanted to go with this particular style is because they wanted to infuse as much of the energy of the comic books as much as possible. And I've heard the animators use this phrase. They wanted to have it be more about taste over reality or realism. So the idea is that while the computers can render much more accurate and realistic depictions, humans have better taste in how things should look, and how things should feel, and the style, and have control over the style. So when they were making these decisions for the art style, but as well as the storytelling, they always emphasize the taste side of it over whether it was realistic or not. You can kind of see it, and there's like a bunch of parts that I always kind of picked at that I always thought was funny. And one was that like Miles walks up walls, but he has full runners on, and like how do you like, does the feet little hairs go through the shoes or something? How is he sticking on there? But they don't care. It's more about the taste and having him have his sneakers as a part of his style, and so they would rather make that decision instead. So, in addition to one thing that it's going to be a common theme about this movie and this production that I found so impressive is that they would have these technical challenges to overcome, but in overcoming it, they managed to add like a unique. They managed to take something that would be a problem, but also turn into what was essentially a strength for the film. And another one is because they were doing this kind of comic book style and having this halftone overlay for shadows and stuff like that. They were able to splice in these kind of shots. If you go to the next shot here, they were able to splice in direct like 2D comic book drawings into their movies, and you'll probably remember they had so many of these shots. Yeah, like these are like if you remember that scene in Fight Club where he talks about he splices in like clips and no one really notices.
Yeah,
this is kind of the exact same that they have. So there's all these action shots this is directly from the movie, and this is just like this is just a frame that's shown for maybe a frame or two during the actual
You're kidding.
movie. Yeah, just like half a second. And
wow,
you don't even notice because it's supposed to be a part of the action. And there's tons of examples of this kind of splicing in here. And it feels so natural though, because your eye has been looking at these halftones and shapes all the time. Like if you look at the bottom image and you see these horizontal lines that they're using for shading,
Yeah.
if you in other images of the environment, they just have those horizontal lines painted on manually to shade, or to make like a tree might cast that kind of shade anyways. So your eye is so used to seeing these lines, and I think it just makes it so natural in terms of when they cut to these images that you don't even recognize something's off. It just looks like it's actually in place, because the shapes and the artistic language they were using is consistent in both frames, but you notice more of the 3D in the main rendering style of the movie.
So how does that help with the image then, if you if you don't even recognize what you have seen?
It adds the action part of it. You feel it though. It's the same kind of thing that doing something just for. I think that's one of the greatest parts of this movie, is that a huge component of animation is all about building up to like a certain moment or like a certain pose. For example, animators often talk about key frame or key poses, right? Because they know that when you're making an animation feel good rather than feel realistic, it's very important for them to hit these like little moments, and you can see them in the film because they put so much effort into something that only exists for a few frames. And so this is one of those examples. If you go to the next one, this is another example, because you see the lines that are drawn not just on Gwen's kicking motion here, but also on the motion lines that are on her feet. Like these subtly, like if you were just to watch this without them, it'll still feel good, but because it's a frame by frame shot, like in terms of their movement, they're snapping from frame to frame. If you don't have these lines in a comic, it would never work, because it would just look like they were maybe falling or just standing there. But if you add those lines, it adds to that 1 second read in a comic, or like for example in this moment, the kicking moment, because this frame exists actually for just one frame, but every frame in this like kicking part here, you could freeze and they'll have these like these exact little lines here, like a little line for when she got smacked, a little line for how her arm is moving, and it all adds together for when you actually see the punch. It feels so comic booky somehow, and it has so much more motion. And that's what was so impressive about this movie, was that they really knew that you didn't have to have a high level of value of production throughout your entire movie, but there are key moments where you have to spend a lot of resources, even though it's only a few frames. Like there's always, if you look at a lot of kind of like lower level TV animation, and especially if you know anyone in TV animation, sometimes the shows, it's all about like how much it costs and how much, like we can't have too many characters because it's going to take too many hours to animate all these characters, blah blah blah, etc etc.
Yeah,
and you really feel that in the story, and you really feel that in why it makes that like a lower class or a lower tier animation, is because they're constantly trying to work through this budget. Whereas in Spiderverse, even though like it looks like a massive production, if you break things down and you look at how they do everything was very like cheap, in terms of they spent all the resources exactly where they really needed to get the most of it out of everything.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. If you go to the next frame, I just want to take a look because I can't remember. Yeah, this is just another example. You see the little lines coming out of Peter's head for the
spider sense.
Spider sense. Like you can't really do that in another movie and have it feel natural. Like you can't really imagine a Pixar movie like you're watching Toy Story, and then they have these kind of like little effects come up. It feels like it's so out of place. But this movie blends it into all of its regular effects. Like maybe someone's gonna get like a bomb explodes. They're actually gonna, if you pause the moment when like an explosion happens, they're hand-drawn effects, hand-drawn 2D effects on per frame. So that was another thing, is that almost they had so many hand-drawn effects over every frame that if you went through this movie and paused, I think they talked about this in one of their animation interviews. Is that every frame had hand drawn animation on it, or hand drawn effects, or hand drawn shading on it, every single frame. So it was just really, really impressive to me.
So is the only 3D part of the movie the actual characters, and then everything is drawn on top?
There is a blend, and they do the blend a lot. I'm gonna get into a little bit later about some of the effects they do per character. But for example, both Penny and Peter Porker are actually 2D purely.
Oh, what?
Yeah, 2D purely.
Cool.
With Penny, I don't know if Penny, they use some sort of flattening rig technique, and it's actually a 3D model, but then it renders like it's a 2D effect, like it's because she looks kind of like a South Park character, like a paper cutout kind of effect, right?
Is that what a flattening rig is?
Well, the rigs in animation, especially for 2D, have gotten so advanced. So before you would have these IK rigs that were more like if you imagine sticks of paper, and then you put pins in them and they kind of like rotate around them, right?
Okay. Was that like rotoscoping?
Not rotoscoping is a different thing. It's like the idea of masking, but this is more like having basic puppets, right? But are just 2D cutouts, like very much like South Park. If you imagine how you would animate in South Park, and then the newer animation techniques, they actually are 3D characters that allow you to do complex things, like having a turning character is really difficult in a 2D rig, because you have to the rig isn't designed to draw the body at different angles. But having a 3D rig that is translated to 2D, you can actually rotate it, and then the software should properly flatten that rig for you to keep that effect. So you don't have to draw, like, say, example, my hand. If I'm rotating it like this, there's so many different angles that you would have to draw in a 2D rig. But in a 3D rig, because the hand's already modeled, all these angles are actually already calculated. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then they just take those 3D points and compress them down to a single plane?
Or they do a rendering or shader that accounts for it. Like, if this is something that Borderland does. They have a lot of effects that are designed around 3D models, but the end result is actually a 2D line, like a stroke or something like that.
In Borderlands, you said?
Yeah, in Borderlands. So Borderlands is a very similar... They use a lot of very similar techniques, but they... Actually, they use a lot of some techniques. You would almost say that Borderlands pioneered a few techniques, or at least the ideas, because they obviously came up before this movie, and then that was the first kind of one of the earliest forays into attempting to try to make animation but in 3D, because that was always a big hurdle. We have a lot more examples now, especially with this film, this being the high water mark of having 3D but also taking the strengths of the 2D animation, right? Because the problem if this movie was all in 2D and all of it was done by hand is that it would cost like an unfathomable amount of animation hours. And you see this actually in Japan, because they're starting to turn out a lot of more 3D effects, because before there was just like slave houses of animators that had to like hand animate so many things. And
Studio Ghibli's of Japan.
Studio Ghibli of Japan's, but like before the innovations, like all animation had to be this way. So even cheap level animations, which had a trade-off, because on the one hand they were beautiful, they had so many amazing animations, but they also, there's so many people that had to work on them that certain projects were just unfathomable because they would take too many man hours. Even Studio Ghibli, like one of the things that's so impressive about them is that they are able to keep that old school style at all and still have this.
Well, they also take 7 years to make a film.
Yeah, they take forever to make a film. Exactly, it's a very like classic and traditional art house. If the next slide is another example of a very similar thing. So you see the outline on Miles here on his feet. It's essentially they're using the same techniques that they did on with the chromatic aberration for the background, but because they apply it in the background, they can now just use that technique everywhere, and it just kind of feels normal in this scene. Like this is in the very end, which he's in the reactor. We probably should have said this is a spoiler warning, but the movie's been out for quite a while. Yeah, so if you don't know, he fights the Kingpin at some point.
He got this far and didn't realize it.
Yeah. So Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is I talked about it a bit, but it's the halftone shading that we had. If you go to the next frame, this is a frame from Wall-E, and I picked this frame because it's just an atmospheric frame, and I wanted to see the difference in terms of how atmosphere and mood is rendered in a classical 3D animation style. And then if you go to the next frame, you see this is much more of what they did. If you look closely at the shadows, they're actually just a bunch of halftones. It's cross-hatching everywhere, and just think about this. Okay, so let's say that these two shots accomplish the same mood. You know, like they're both able to show atmosphere, show kind of which historically in movies and video games has been something hard to do. It was one of the first kind of like technical feats people had to kind of achieve in 3D because proper fog and atmosphere was actually kind of like hard to render. If you just look at old Reboot, like Reboot had no atmosphere like whatsoever. You could see into the distance forever, right? So if both of these screens accomplish the same thing, but Spiderverse does it for an unfathomable amount cheaper because all they're doing here is flat 3D rendering, right? And then they have 2D panels or hand-drawn, people doing hand-drawn shadows over top of it. Whereas in Wall-E, if you just go back to that previous slide for a second, just imagine how much work it was to model everything in this scene and then to texture it and then to make it all those textures realistically. That actually has such a high amount of overhead that only a studio like Pixar could handle it. Whereas if you go to if you go to the next frame where we were just at, this was done on their end because they didn't have enough manpower to make this movie, and they had to kind of quote unquote cheat out. But they found a way that accomplishes almost even better because now it's a part of this unique style that they're creating, but it's so much faster, and it also allows them to iterate. Like they were able to make these animations shorts and clip them together with rough effects and to get the feel really early on, super cheap, rather than Pixar, who has an entire render farm dedicated to rendering out daily so they know, Wall-E looks good here or the effect looks good there. Oftentimes, especially if you look at like big movie productions, big 3D movie productions, you won't see the entire thing put together until like 3/4 into the project, where finally the effects get to put in and the cloth sim gets to put in and the hair sim gets to put in. There's so many players that go into there that, and then what if you get it wrong? What if you get that sequence and it doesn't feel right? How long does it take to kind of fix that?
Just the iteration over it alone.
Yeah. So that's one of the techniques that they did, the halftone shading. And then the another thing this is something that's actually kind of it's kind of obvious, but a lot of people already, not obvious, but a lot of people have talked about it already. It's the fact that this movie is animated on 1s and 2s. Have you heard of this kind of concept before?
No.
So, if you go through the movie frame by frame, you'll notice that certain things move every frame and certain characters and things move every other frame.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
Right.
Now I know what
Exactly. So 1s are every frame, 2s are every other frame. And if you watch a movie there's been a debate in terms of what's better or what's the right thing to do, but films that are in 1s feel smoother, but films that or like animations that are done in 2s, the action feels more crisp, and it feels like and if you watch this movie, you'll notice that not everything, like you feel some characters kind of like blip, almost like you're watching an animation, even though they're 3D characters. But because they're popping in 2s instead, it makes their movements feel like you're the way that your eye would see someone that's moving really fast. You would lose them for a second, and then you would catch them again in these moments, and that's what animating on 2s allows you to kind of mimic, right? And so this movie, they found a way to do both at the same time, which sounds like it wouldn't be that hard, but when you're talking about things on a large production like this, it becomes really difficult because you have two pipelines now. Like, do you, and I'll tell you one area that's particularly difficult is if you imagine physics sims, because they use physics sims here a lot. If one physics sim, you don't simulate what happens in every frame, like how do you match two things that you have that only one thing only moves in every other frame and another thing moves every frame? right? And
Yeah.
so they actually showed this example of like say there's a cloth on top of a ball, and then one ball is moving up on twos and one ball is moving up on ones, and then obviously the ones on ones looks smoother and looks like it works properly, but on twos, because it's kind of popping, the Sims think that it's actually like accelerating and then moving the cloth upwards, so it gets all jank. So they had an entire pipeline that would automatically convert all their rigs so that their Sims could it would essentially find the in-betweens that for the frames that should have been there. So if he moves from here on frame 1 and then goes to here on frame 3, the rig auto builds where it should have been on frame 2, just for the simulations that they use on ropes and cloth and everything like that.
Gotcha. That's cool.
So another thing that they did, if you go to the next frame, a part of this process here, because they're animating on twos, what you would normally do in a comic book, if you wanted to show someone maybe punching someone super fast, they would have multiple limbs, like their arm would be here and then also like over here. In the movie,
I've seen JoJo.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, you see the Chun-Li kick in Street Fighter. It's exactly the same thing, right? But, because they're animating on twos, they wanted to get that effect. And they would actually have the rigs, like I showed you here, with multiple hands, because they would hack. This is a direct screen from the movie. If you pause, you'll see this exact frame. And they didn't give a care. They didn't care at all, because this is the same thing.
It's like Miles with like two hands.
Yeah, it's taste over reality, because the taste of it is that when you see this in action and you don't freeze it, it feels like he went from one action to another action to another action, even though you don't see that, right? You see his hands kind of clipping, etc., etc. And so this is another example of them taking something that is a technical challenge to them, animating on ones and twos, and then exploiting that technology that they like, this little like technology strength that they've kind of developed now, because they can animate on one and twos. Now they can take advantage of techniques that you would only do on twos or you would only do on ones in the same movie. And the most famous example of this, and it's been talked about a lot, is there's a scene where Peter Parker is teaching Miles how to swing for the first time. You might have heard of this at all. Have you heard of this?
No, this is new to me.
Okay, so if you look at that scene, Peter, because he's like Spider-Man already, he's animated on ones and he's very smooth, and then Miles is animated on two and he's struggling and he's like bouncing around, and then there's a moment where they swing together and they actually slowly bring Miles into the ones, and then suddenly they're in sync and they're both animated on the same. And not only do they do the ones and twos, but if you look at the particular frames, they're offset. So like Peter might be moving on like this on 1 and then Miles is moving on 1.2 or 1.4. He's just like, his frames are slightly off, so they're never in sync. And this is something that they talked about a lot, because it's awesome, and you don't even notice it, but if you watch that part again, you'll definitely pick it up.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Okay, so the next part I'll get into is we talked about the technical rigs, right? So this is another thing that they did with the rigs for, like, we were mentioning how people would use 3D rigs to go 2D. This is the opposite. How we use 3D rigs, 2D elements, but in our 3D rigs. So go to the next slide here. What you'll notice is, this isn't the slide, but this is just an example of another cheat that they do. They have their rigs are designed to get extremely broken. His arm is so stretched in this one frame, but this is just for stylistic effect. The same thing with having the extra hands. Anyway, so the next one is the one I want to talk about. So here. So one thing that I thought was so cool when I learned about it is I want you to just look at the facial lines that are shown up here.
Like his brow and his mouth?
Yeah, so they used a combination of both actual rigs on the model. Go to the next frame for a second. So the animators had control over these specific like wrinkles and stuff. And so this is another thing that they did, not just because it was a stylistic choice, but otherwise they would have to actually have that in the geometry or in the neural map, that those wrinkles, and and they would never just look as good as a simple line that's in a comic book, right? So they have the rigs set up for one to have these lines, But the most impressive part to me, I wonder, did I have a slide for? No, I did. So what they did was that they wanted to have a program that would automatically create some of these lines on the face. So they have specific controls here for the eyebrows, but the nose, for example, all that was generated by a combination of pre-drawn images and machine learning.
Really?
Yeah. So what they did was they took Miles's face and they took multiple angles, right? And then they had the artist manually draw in where they would draw the lines for the nose. And that's going to change at every angle. Like every artist will tell you that, like, you know, as soon as it turns one inch over here, you have to draw a different type of line, right?
Okay.
So what they did was they got someone to hand draw it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the machine would take these, kind of like they would do with blend shapes in other games, and it would build a profile for Miles so that when he's on the screen and it's at this particular angle, the computer thinks it should be this particular line.
Oh,
and then
man.
Yeah, that's already really cool. And then on top of that, there would be someone who would manually fix any lines that were off, because they would, you know, it's not perfect, but they would use that information to teach the computer to do that line properly next time.
Mm-hmm.
So they were
basic machine learning, always iteration, always learning.
It's crazy to me that they were using this kind
It's
of technology.
exponential.
So then
That's awesome.
So many of the scenes that they, even though they had all this hand drawn stuff, so many of it was also like generated for them, and then all they did is just tweak it a little bit.
That's really cool.
That was one of the most.
Is this all stuff they developed specifically for this movie? They hadn't. Nothing was inherited. Nothing was already existing.
I'll get into this a little bit later, but the project was actually kind of crazy. Like I when I first saw the movie, and I'm thinking about like what kind of studio would have, like I would think it'd be like a studio like Pixar, like a project that where, you know, they have this idea and they have this major backing and we have, like, you know, this like massive infrastructure to create the movie. But it was actually a bit like chaotic because they had one art director and then eventually they removed him, and then they had another art director, and I think eventually there was 3 art directors on the project, and the teams actually turned over a lot. But what was really, really impressive to me was that it seemed like everyone who took over the project, unlike in some other projects, they didn't disrespect what the previous person did. Like, I've seen so many projects where someone takes over and then they say we have to do something different because, you know, I'm the new guy. Like, I know the right thing to do. Like,
the new boss can never be the same as the old boss.
Yeah, exactly, right? But it seemed to me, I'll get into this a bit later, but every time, if you look at what was the original inception of this movie, they kept so many elements to it. Yeah, I'll get into it a little bit. I just want to move on to one more particular technical aspect, or 2 more. If you go to the next slide here, this is just another example of their decisions to go for taste over reality. So this is a kind of a famous shot in the movie, right? This is this is the non-rendered version, so it's just the Maya file with the 3D models that they can use with the animations, right? And then the next slide is what the city actually looks like in the Maya file. It's like it's like a giant mess that like is completely impractical of how the city works. And the city
rectangles and cylinders, none of them connected to the ground, all just jumbled together like twigs in a hay bale.
At random angles, but it's all designed to mimic the New York skyline because, you know, Spider-Man's famously from New York. But even in the movie, they would grossly exaggerate New York buildings all the time. Like, some buildings would be like 100 feet taller than like any building would normally be, but they all used it to kind of just make the feel of the movie feel right. And then the next scene here, we talked a little bit about before, or the next slide, the team, this is just like, so first off, this is a beautiful shot period of so-called like the New York cityscape, but
Is this a painting, or are these 3D
this is a
models
frame.
for the cars? This is a painted frame.
This is those are 3D models from the car, right? This is a combination though, and we can't quite zoom in, but if you look at this image, the further away something is, the more 2D it actually is. So the cars in the front are 3D models. The background, if you look at the purplish pink hue background, they're actually just blobs of paint. Like they're just rectangles and little like lines here and there. And then so what this is just what I'm just trying to illustrate here is that the art mastery at the high level in terms of the project and art directors is so strong because they know exactly at what point it doesn't matter anymore. Like if you try to do this, but say for example you started to use blobs of shapes, but for like the bus on the right or the car on the left, like we're all gonna know that this is off and you're trying to like pass off a 2D drawing. But they pick the right moment in terms of the distance where it just becomes like it doesn't matter anymore because the human eye wouldn't properly see it anyways. And then when it becomes a blur like that, things in the distance just become more of a feeling to you, more so than like a specific shape. And so they take great advantage of it. And the next slide is another example of this. So in this slide, everything here is realistically rendered, but except what's in the bus. The bus is a 2D painting of people just standing there. And because they know this is a quick frame, this bus isn't going to this is just like a maybe an action sequence where Spider-Man's running down the middle of the street.
Yeah.
But you know, look at the like no one would notice, right? Like no one would notice. They saved I don't know how many ungodly amounts of hours to like not have to have people in that bus.
Yeah.
And
even like more suggestions of people, they're all elongated and stuff.
Exactly. So one of the like if you become an animator or you begin to draw, one of the things you'll realize is that when you copy from just real life, there's something that you realize the pros and masters do is that they add to real life when they're drawing it. If you look at the Disney animations, like they have motions, people don't move actually like how they do in real life. They move exaggeratedly, but just enough for you to get the hint of it. And so that's a common theme throughout the decisions that they made in this movie is that the gesture of everything is more important than the actual image or reality of what it is. Yeah, so that's kind of like the last little bit of technical stuff that I wanted to showcase. And then I just wanted to get into like I love the characters that they decided here. Specifically all 5 characters was like we talked a bit about the risks that they took in the movie. I'm not sure if this is a bit of a risk because it's obviously like a part of the Spider-Verse story and comic book, but they just did I think it's just hard. Like it would be so hard to do an animation movie where you're doing this kind of experimental art style that's never been done before, and then you also have to incorporate essentially 3 or 4 more art styles into the same scene, in the same environment. So I want to talk about each of the Spider men or women, Spider people, right? First off, we have from left to right, Peter Porker, the Looney Tunes style one.
The amazing Spider-Ham.
Amazing Spider-Ham, and they talked a lot about in the movie how they wanted to keep like Gwen, Miles, and Peter B. Parker from the same type of like reality. The laws of physics works in a certain way, but Peter Porker exists in Bugs Bunny's universe, and so they let him do like ridiculous things in the movie, like float around, and he carries like a giant like mallet out of nowhere, and like an anvil falls on someone, like what's going on, but they don't care. They're just like, okay, taste over reality, and it fits perfectly. But one of the things about this character that I love, so they have this moment in the movie, and it's one of the most important moments for Miles because it's when they tell him that they need to leave him behind because he's not ready to be Spider-Man yet, or he's not Spider-Man yet. He's just like pretending right now. And if you remember, like, every time Peter Porker talks, it's a joke, right? And then they give him one of the most poignant and serious lines of the entire movie. And it's when he tells him that, like, the thing about being Spider-Man is that you can't save everyone, right? Like this massive understanding about, like, people are going to die. And, his uncle just died. And so, like, why would you ever decide to give the comic relief character this line? Like, it turns to him, and I'm expecting a joke, and he gives you this heartfelt line that works so well. Like, it's just like it's a part of what they did was that they wanted to illustrate that each spider person was the same good person on the inside, even though they're so vastly weird and different, right? And so they all have a moment to show the audience why they are like the good Spider-Man, not like a villain in this movie, but like the hero of the movie in their own movie, right? So Peter Parker was great. Gwen is awesome. Like one of the best portrayals of just like a female character. I just loved her so much. And she in terms of like if you were to rank the Spider people in terms of their careers, she's at like the particular prime compared to all the other Spider-Men. Like Miles is just starting off. Peter B. Parker is essentially a has-been Spider-Man that's just struggling to like get his life back together, right? And so she's actually in the peak kind of heroic ability,
zenith.
right? Spider zenith, right? And Penny, okay, so Penny Parker is a particular favorite of mine because they had their choice of who to pick for the Spider-Verse. If you look at the Spider-Verse comic book, they have a lot of Spider-Man to pick from. They have a lot, right? And I feel like they picked her because, like, to me, it's a acknowledgement of of what Japanese animation has like done to the field. Because like it's undeniable that Japanese animation, manga, whatever you want to call it, has like a certain edge and appeal that is just not existent in like Western animations. You don't have like a Dragon Ball Z or like any kind of like crazy hype fantasy stuff in the West, right? They had, let's be honest, like if we were just looking at purely animation, Transformers versus something like from the East or from Japan, like the animations for action was not nearly the same level, right? The action in Japan was crazy. There were
a lot more duplicate frames in American animation.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. There's so many. They would like reuse the same explosion over and over again. And then meanwhile in Japan,
looking at you, G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, I was looking at like Transformers or the old Spider-Man, the one like do you remember the old Spider-Man?
Yes,
they had
the one where he had the single swing through the
same
city animation.
The same. Or like I remember the Rhino had the same run animation that would show every time he'd like come onto screen.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, Japan's coming up with Akira, like this crazy animation that has like the best action and explosion and physics you've ever seen. Okay, so Penny and to me was an acknowledgement of like that kind of art style. And so her character was kind of basic in terms of they didn't give her a lot of moments, but the moments that they gave her were so strong, and like it was just enough to get her character to work. I want to see more of her. I hope she's in the next one. And they actually gave her a bunch of stuff in the background. So if you go back through this movie for whatever reason and you're freezing, you should watch every time Penny's in the background because I feel like a lot of people gave her a lot of love because even though she didn't have much lines, they gave her as much love as possible, like when she's doing other stuff. So there's a scene especially when all the spider people fight all the villains at Aunt May's house. There's a lot of great stuff there that she does while everyone else is talking or you're looking at someone else. You should just anyone else watching out there, check out that particular scene. And then Miles. I don't think I really need to explain. The entire movie is about Miles, so he's obviously awesome. But I particularly like Peter B. Parker. Like, he's my favorite Spider-Man in the entire series and the entire Spider-Verse right now. Cause
just down on his luck, Spider-Man.
I just love that idea. Like, you just don't talk about that in heroes. Like, you see a little bit just recently in the latest Avenger movies with Thor being, like, the kind of has-been hero and exploring that idea of what happens when you do the greatest thing of your life and then what happens after that, you know? And I love the idea of exploring a superhero that is like that has failed at stuff, like that has you've done things that are not the greatest. Yeah, like Watchmen style, or just that would be kind of considered a failure. But like the film showcases how like a message that's not often talked about is like how to pick yourself up after you missed your mark. It's Miles is at the beginning of his story, so like he hasn't done anything wrong. He's young. He has like all this opportunity. You can't fault him for failing, but Peter B. Parker is at a point where I think a lot of people might get in their lives where they've tried to do something and it hasn't worked out, and you don't see any recognition from that in the media that you see. It's always like either a hero right away or you're like a villain or right away. I like the acknowledgement of it seems like it touched on a much more realistic point of life to have Peter B. Parker be like that. And the fact that they showed the good Parker was great too, because it was just like, it makes you so much more real, because you always have an idea of what the greatest person you could be is, right, in your head. And then he goes into that universe and he gets to actually see it, and it has to confront, like, it's such a poignant character point for him to be in that universe, because it confronts the exact thing that he's been so afraid of the entire life. So that whole character arc is so complete in this movie, and I think that he had the best one. He had the best line for me when he said, Miles, it's just a leap of faith. I'm like, so many great things for him.
Yeah.
And then
he's also like the Spider-Man that, it's not like he never was a good guy and he never did amazing things. It's just,
it was harder
he got
on him.
old, right? He's confronting like a middle-age crisis.
Yeah. He started to deal with all the middle-age stuff,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Like he was still Spider-Man, but like, I would imagine the Spider-Man that died in the film is almost like your typical hero Spider-Man, where they've done everything right and they had this great life, but he represents another side where you've done all the things to be good, but the world isn't as kind to you and doesn't reward you, which, it happens.
You just made the one mistake that just happened to be the last one.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I loved his character. And then Spider Noir, I think that's what they call them.
Spider-Man Noir.
Yeah, I just loved it with him because they essentially distilled all the different Spider people into their comic versions, and Spider Noir was supposed to represent those older comics during World War II and the Cold War, where the printing fidelity was quite low on newsprint, and so your characters would have to be often silhouetted completely in black or have really, really simple designs. And so that's what they did to his overall design, is because they just simplified it, made a lot of his shapes just black in shadow, and they kept like his aesthetic for his comic to translate over. And plus he was also like super funny. I didn't realize it was Nicolas Cage that played him for the longest time. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Nicolas Cage has been in the most variety of movies I've ever I think he's become a meme, but if you look at his like acting history, he's been in such a wide variety of films. It's astonishing.
Yeah, and he's kind of making a comeback in really good movies too, like Mandy, and I just watched The Color Out of Space 2 days ago, and it was amazing.
I feel like even the movies that people would say are bad, like you've seen them. Like, and and it's something that's like Face Off is one of the most ridiculous movies, but like, who hasn't seen Face Off and seen the Face Off?
I really like Face Off.
It was a great movie,
Face Off is
right?
really fun.
It's a ridiculous movie, but it's a great movie, right? Yeah. Anyways, so I want to talk a little about the Spider-Verse people, but now I wanted to break down a bit about. So I talked a bit about the original art director moving on to the project. His name, if you go to the next page here, his name is, maybe you'll help me pronounce it, Alberto Mego. Is that how you pronounce it?
I don't know.
I don't even know if you would know how to pronounce it.
That's not a Brazilian name I'm familiar with.
Okay, so anyways, before he started doing the Spider-Verse, he actually worked on the animation Tron movie, which, I actually watched a little bit just for the designs, because it was the artwork and the cinematography was actually super strong.
Which one is this?
They made a Tron TV show, like a kids show.
Oh, really?
Like a 3D show. Yeah, so it was in the Tron universe. Tron, the character, was in it, but it was like a more stylized 3D Star Wars Rebels kind of look to it.
Okay.
But I looked at it after I saw this movie, and I was like, oh yeah, like you can already see
the influence,
cinematic like expertise that Alberto Miego has. And so he was the art director that put together the pitch for this, not the pitch, but the initial animation to prove out the story, to get the project started. And it's available all on his website, or if you go to Vimeo, just type in his name, Alberto Miego Spiderverse. He talks a bit about what happened in terms of him leaving, and then he also got permission to release this little, like, these 4 clips of what they presented to sell this idea of the Spider-Verse. Because imagine trying to pitch Spider-Verse like before anyone's seen what it is. Like, how do you kind of tell that you want to do this like risky animation style that no one's seen before, I highly recommend watching these 4 clips. Like it's one of the most beautiful sequences I've ever seen. And we talked about how this movie boils down complex visuals but makes it done cheaply and effectively. Essentially what all these sequences are a bunch of hand-drawn sketches overlaid onto very simple Maya geometry using camera pans in Maya. So like they'll take a building and he'll just draw, like you can see in one of the screens there, the little lines to represent the building. And then they would overlay it with music and like and like just like super strong animation like drawings that you see there. And it sets up the entire movie. Like if you look at these clips, they are the most important parts, the best parts of the movie. Like the clip that you're seeing in this little image here, it's this is before the script was essentially locked down. We knew what the characters were going to be and et cetera, et cetera. So all it is that they knew that they wanted to be in Miles Morales' universe. In this universe, Peter Parker has died. So it's just a little clip of him taking on the mantle. And they have Miles's montage moment, that famous, what's up, danger moment where he jumps off the building for the first time, right, and has the suit on. That whole sequence is in these little drawings that are in here. And if you watch this, it's like not only did they keep this original feel of the shot, but everything that they added didn't take away from it. It added so much more and more. So if you go to the next frame, for example, this is a shot directly from the animatic that I'm talking about here, right? And you can even see here they're starting to use some of the effects we're talking about, like blurring, where you want to blur just so that you get motion, and then keeping one character in focus. And then you go to the next frame here. This is the shot that they used in the final movie.
Wow. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like they kept so much of it. And so the next few frames are just more and more examples of where this happens. So go to the next one, for example. This is a direct frame. Here, this is Spider-Man in the same moment. This is the montage for the animatic. This is the montage that happens way later in the film.
Yeah.
And so, but if you watch it, the music is different, and it has such a different feel. Like I would be very interested if there was a movie with this kind of original feel too. You can see what Alberto Miago started with. It has a very super unique, like if you watch the sequence, you won't see this kind of like style with the music anywhere else. And I understand what they added into the final movie. When you watch it, you'll notice a difference. And the difference is that they added the Marvel side of it, the popular side of it, like the more mainstream elements of it. But they were able to keep the core raw goodness. And that's what actually shows up through the film. If you go to the next slide here again, it's just another slide right after that. And then go to the next one for a second here. Like this is that like super, super important moment where Miles is about to jump off.
Yeah, before he does the somersault.
Yeah, and the film that's in the animation has a bit more of a gritty sense to it. Go to the next frame for a second here. Like they cut in here to him remembering how Peter died. And so in this universe, Peter dies to that blast, but he has this much more visceral, like quick second burst where, showing Peter Parker like flesh like blowing up, that's pretty hardcore for Marvel, right?
Yeah.
So most likely not going to happen. That's why I would love to have seen this version of, though. It's so much more gritty, but it has that difference in it. But then if you go to the next slide here again, like the next few frames, in my opinion, which is some of the most impressive and beautiful frames in the entire film, were in the film the very moment of its conception. These next two slides that are in here, the hand breaking off here, the super backwards this shot with the environment upside down is just so stunning here.
Yeah, it looks like they even flipped it 180 degrees upside down. So
so this is another. You see, that's the original idea, and then the final implementation is even better.
Yeah,
like they found a better camera angle that exaggerates the environment even more. It's so much more extreme, but it's the same concept, but it doesn't work worse. There's so many times where I see like you have this strong creative idea let's say like Star Wars, for example, this great base, and you just see it diluted by like they wanted to do this, but every time they did this, they lost a little bit of what was the original like element. That's what so blows my mind about this project is that despite having so many people jump on top of it, everyone seemed to be respectful enough to respect that what they already have was so strong, and they didn't remove that. They could have easily like taken this shot and try to do something else with it, but they recognized, this is a credit to both the people who came after them, but also to Alberto Mego, that what he created was so goddamn strong already that they just needed to find a way to render it and capture it.
So how come he left the project then?
So I believe he talks about it. I don't want to say for him, but based on my understanding of his statement, it was essentially that, you know, Marvel wanted to make a Marvel movie, or like the production studios and Sony, not Marvel, sorry, Sony, because Sony is the one that created it, wanted to make a movie that was a bit more Marvel and a bit more PG. And if you watch the animatic, it's not like they're gross or anything like that, but it was clearly an even further pushed version of this movie where we showed a few freeze frames of when they drew in kind of some color, some like actual comic frames, and they split it in there. In his version, I actually think it was great, but probably just a little too outside the box for like a large studio to be able to invest into, is that like he would go super heavy into the whole comic book frame thing. Some of the best sequences that is used in the movie, for example, when they, you know, each Spider person has that "this is my story" kind of moment, and they're like, "I'm Gwen," et cetera, and they go into that comic book kind of
the
montage.
Yeah.
If you watch the animatic, that's all in there, and it's like the first time that you would ever see it so naturally cut together. And so they used the exact types of framing that they did in the animatic that they did in the final movie. There's like a shot with like Gwen running, and it has like a vertical frame split, and then even in this scene here, when Miles jumps off, there's a part where he's falling, and then it cuts to multiple vertical frames of him falling at the same time to get that kind of like feeling of him going do 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 do, like falling further and further and further. That was all in the original animatic too.
Very cool.
So like it set the groundwork for so much of what ended up being in the film. And I looked up this all this up when I was doing my own kind of like study on this kind of art direction, art style, because I was so impressed by how they were able to combine realistic 3D rendering techniques and textures, but then they found a way to like overlay this 2D style. Like it just makes so much sense for me as an artist. I'm like, man, that's crazy, because it also makes it easier to paint really complicated scenes if you like find a way to steal some of these techniques and like harness it yourself. So I did a bit of analysis, and I came up with this came up to Alberto Mego here, and man, like it blew my mind in terms of like how good this original, and it's just a few lines. Like the entire thing is like, you think that you could do it yourself. Obviously you couldn't, because it's like so much more complicated than that. But like the simplicity of it, you can see where like you can go into this meeting and be like, hey, look at what I did with just me and maybe a couple of other guys that are techs here. Like imagine the story that we can get if we can use this system and iterate. Like I think that's the key, is like it showcased how fast you can iterate an idea. If you can crank this out, this level of quality of animation with just like a few markers and stuff like that, it showcased like, okay, then, you know, when they go into the actual movie sequence or a production, because every movie production goes through the same kinds of cycles. You start rendering the story, you know, and then that render or that scene goes through review processes where they talk about, you know, are the characters moving properly? Are the characters lit properly? Does everything look right? Does everything feel right? And a good studio, like, you know, a high class animation studio like Pixar or something, will go through a lot of iterations where they'll send it back, and then, you know, we got to change this, and you don't know the results of your changes until you get it through that pipeline again. And just like in a video game, if your pipeline is super clean and fast, and you can see your gameplay changes as like the way they see their animation changes quickly, it's much faster to make like fixes. And so for them, they were able to probably preview their entire movie so early on in this simplified style, and they can start making the fixes while it was all cheap to do before they spent all the resources to build the models, blah, 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 blah. Because in a regular production, you might have someone that outsources all the buildings here, for example, but because they knew that all these shots, the buildings weren't like super close up, you can get away with hacking a bunch of lower textures and animation cheats that would still make it look good, if not better. But you don't have to animate it. You don't have to like, spend all the resources over there. So it was just one of the greatest examples of like, I bet you like there's so much, the efficiency of the dollars that go onto the screen is so high in this project. And it was made here in Vancouver.
Yeah. And so it was very efficient because they don't pay animators all that much.
Well, it's just we don't have a massive, like we don't have a Pixar level animation like background here.
Yeah.
But this movie to me is actually the best animated movie out there, at least right now that I've seen.
I can definitely agree with you on that.
Right.
Barring something from like Studio Ghibli, right? Or
yeah,
something that they spent 7 years on, right?
If anything, it's arguable. And then you look at all the other studios that they're competing against, and like, man, they definitely have something special here. If you can come up with like, you know, like out of nowhere, this first
it's
project.
So distinct, right? And not have, like you said, not having a basis on everything. So much of it fell in this vision that you just don't see any other movie even attempting to get even close to this. You look at a DreamWorks movie, you look at a Pixar movie, and they sort of go for the same style. Sort of the characters might look a little different, but
yeah,
at least to me, you know, my untrained, unartist eye, it's sort of that same, oh, it's a 3D animated film.
Yeah.
Whereas this came out, and I was like, is this 2D? Is this 3D? It turns out to be, as you explained, a blend of everything that is wholly its own.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I think
what's
Pixar,
the state of the studio right now? Do they have another project in the works?
It's Spiderverse 2 has already been announced a while ago, and I think they might have a year release date already. I don't know if they have an exact like month release date, and I know that the people are already working on it here in Vancouver. To your point about Pixar, I think that when Pixar first came out with some of their like really big hitters, like, you know, Finding Nemo and stuff, like that was when it was very unique. But then now that they've had a longer period of time to release more movies, people can see that now they're the routine in the type of storytelling in movies are right now. Like, and it's not bad. It was innovative for a time, but you can tell it's not that they're worried about making risks, but they have a particular flavor that they like to stick to. And what I loved about this movie, like, not just like before Black Panther, like the music in this movie is so goddamn good, and it's so unconventional in terms of what movie music they picked in this movie. Like, you know, you wouldn't expect there to be that much hip hop in a Marvel style movie before Black Panther, right? You know, so that was another thing I didn't even get a chance to talk about, but the soundtrack is complete fire. Like, holy jeez. So the ability that they didn't use a regular Marvel soundtrack during Miles's montage, like that
like
montage,
a cinematic sweeping score like the Avengers.
Yeah, they put it a little bit in there. You can hear it that they like kind of have it in the background build up, but then they have that "What's Up Danger," this song that is actually like probably not, if you just put the song on, I'm pretty sure that they played so many songs that they had to change the actual words. For example, the song that he loves, that what's that song that he was, Sunflower. You know that song I'm talking about, right? They changed his lyrics, so in the movie he says the wrong lyrics by accident.
Oh.
But the real lyrics is like talking about picking up like prostitutes or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah. Because, you know, it's a hip hop movie, or it's a hip hop song, right? Like, obviously that's like, if he was a real kid, he would be listening to that kind of music for sure, right? So, but, you know, they did a little bit of
creative licensing,
not Disneyfying, but like, you know, like making it softer so that young audiences can watch it, which I completely understand, right? So yeah, that was pretty much it for me. I freaking love this movie so much. It taught me so much about art and animation, and it's kind of, I can see you can already see the inspiration. It was, if you follow art in terms of like like I follow a lot of artists and concept artists, you can already see that there's like a point in time before this movie and there's a point in time after this movie where there's a certain style that's constantly out there now. Now everybody is incorporating halftones into 3D character models. Everybody. Like all art style, and that, like, everyone's obviously looked at this film and realized that it's a super strong point.
Sort of the Borderlands effect, where after 2006, everybody wanted to do that sort of like half cell shaded, half textured assets.
Yeah. Like they're gonna try the impressive thing for this movie was just that they not like you can't point to one thing that they did super well that made the movie, because they executed so well on so many different elements. Even if you're just like a casual movie fan, like when have you ever seen such a succinct story that's a retelling of a story that I was honestly bored of hearing? I didn't want to hear more about Spider-Man's uncle, but Ben dying, or like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like the same thing with Batman. But they retold this story, but they had like multiple character arcs that were super, super strong. They picked a bunch of like music choices that were super rare, all in the background of doing the super crazy art style, and all executed to probably the best in the genre, arguably, at least, right? So yeah, I was just so impressed by this goddamn movie.
Yeah, I can tell. How do you think this is going to influence then movies coming up? Do you know of any projects that are following this sort of? Because it's saving them a lot of money. Then what's the argument then for them to do something more typical? Like, you look at the budgets on Pixar and DreamWorks movies, and they're through the roof. Timelines as well.
I bet you people will follow it, but I think that part of the movie's art style and style as a general is like, it's one of those things that you need a master to really wield it properly. Like, I think that there's a lot of things that people could copy and they'll grab bits and pieces of it, but we talked about that little example of the halftoning, and then using all those weaknesses in your project, but building tools to overcome them and then essentially make them the unique attributes of them. That's something that, like, it's not about whether you do this art style or another style. It's whether your team and the person who's directing it has the creative capacity and problem solving ability to be able to do that in a project. Because it's not just about doing a style. It's if you looked at the project, it's essentially an evolution of like them fixing something or figuring something out, and then moving after that with all their tools and seeing what the next thing that they can do is, or build upon the last thing. And there's so many steps that could only happen because the previous step already happened. So they didn't like plan it. They were often looking at the tools that they had and then using them and then building new tools that would utilize those tools. So you could say that, people will take a lot of, it's like, you look at any successful sports teams, right? People are just going to be analyzing like the individual talent, but the organization that put them together and the training and the teamwork and the background, all that stuff is arguably even more important than maybe like, if Michael Jordan does a jump shot with his left hand or right hand or rolls his wrist a certain way, et cetera, right? Yeah. So I actually have seen some films begin to take this influence from it. If you look at on Netflix, there is a series that's become really popular for good reason. I think it's called Love, Death, and Robots.
Yep.
It's a series of different animations, and you can see a number of effects that are in there, including the animation on 1s and 2s in certain ones. And that was something that I saw. I was like, okay, yeah, there's a particular episode where there's like a bunch of farmers and Gundams. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. I think I know.
Right. Yeah. So I think if I remember correctly, they do a bunch of animations on 2s stuff on in that one that I was like, oh,
giving it more of an anime look.
Yeah. Anyways, that was also like another like a really cool.
That's pretty quick soon after it too.
It was pretty quick soon, but I think what happened was that there's probably a bit of an art movement on the back side, amongst artists from different countries, and then I think that some of these top tier artists like Alberto Mego, etc., are honed into it before we are, and so Alberto might be, or like this movie might be the first to exhibit some of this information. But I guarantee you, if I was like the art director working on it, like this would be quite like gossip heavy that you would talk to your other artist friends about, and amongst the community, everyone wants to share what they're working on when they can. Even
well, also Alberto has left as well, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. So he left, and
so then the other 3 directors that came on and they helped push the studio through. That's at least four people that have this sort of experience under the belt. Yeah,
it might have been 2. I don't know the exact numbers, but yeah, there was I think at least 2 other directors after Alberto, so 3, at least 3, I think. And so I don't know as much of the story in the background because it's hard to find out about how things actually work on in projects.
Yeah.
But I must have. It feels like all of them added something, because like when you look at the footages after that they because they post all their artwork now because it's out for a while and you can buy the art book. Like there's an evolution in terms of what they've added to each part of the movie. If you look at Alberto's animations at the beginning as like the base framework that you have for like a car, and then everything else was just added onto that framework, and then this final composition that you get in the movie is like this amalgamation of a bunch of people putting their best aspects or best like expertise into it. Yeah, so I'm very excited for the next one, man. It might be too high of a bar for it to hit. Like
they're gonna make it extra Marvel now that they're gonna put more money into it.
I think it's even more just like me. Like we talked about it like last week. I like if you have high expectations, it ruins a lot of things. Like it's hard to see a movie for how good it really is if you think it should have been better. Like I don't want to be the shitty parent to movies where I'm like, damn, like you could have been such a better kid, right? Like you're missing out on what you have right there.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how I want to handle my expectations for the next one, because like this is like arguably maybe not for everyone, but for me this is like the GOAT right now. So like how
the GOAT.
The greatest of all time,
gotcha,
like the greatest animation
gotcha.
so far. It's like watching a boxer and you think he's the best fighter ever, and he just like won the title championship, but it's the next fight, and I'm like, okay, are they really a champion, or did they get lucky? Did they just like happen to catch the other opponent of this movie on a good day or something like that? So I'm curious to see. I'm curious, but I'm trying to like curb my expectations of it.
Do we know who's gonna be? Who's leading that movie? Have they changed art directors at all?
I do know it's not Alberto Migo. I don't know who the art director is. I haven't looked it up. I think it might be the same one who ended the project. But I don't even know the name, so I'm not really sure.
And it's still the Vancouver studio.
It is still the Vancouver studio. I'm not sure if
they didn't do a Sonic and close down immediately afterwards.
Oh no! Oh yeah, thank God. Thank God. No, it's a Sony Animation Studio here. They have some other projects that they work on in Vancouver too. So I think they have like a steady supply of like work coming in from the States.
Did they do the Addams Family one as well, or is that someone else?
They might have. I do remember seeing that on, because I follow some artists on that work on the project, and they showcase other projects they worked on. You might be right. I could be. I don't know. I have to double check that.
Some homework.
Yeah. So that's it for me in terms of Spiderverse.
All right. Well,
yeah.
I learned so much in that hour that we spent. Holy crap.
I'm glad.
You know your shit. Very
well,
nice.
It's my job.
Yeah.
Like literally.
It's only your job.
It's just my job.
All right. Well, let's take it down a notch. Let's talk about some Stone Buddhas.
So I know nothing about this game. You got break it down for me. What's the elevator like pitch for this game?
So this is Arrest of a Stone Buddha.
Okay.
This is a game where you play as a hitman.
Yeah.
He's been doing this a while.
Oh my God.
And it's just like John Woo with everyone. Yeah. And you look at this trailer that I'm showing right now, and it's just you walking along single plane, people coming on all sides, and you shoot them as they come at you. And you might think this is just a mindless action game. Pretty simple animation and stuff, right?
It reminds me of all those Java games that I used to play.
Exactly. Two things that stuck out to me though in this game is how detailed these pixel backgrounds are. Like the characters are pretty simple.
Oh yeah, actually the backgrounds are quite nice.
The backgrounds are super nice.
Yeah.
And when
It's
you
hard
play
to do
it,
pixel art.
and when you play it, you expect there to be a lot of action, and the game is like, no, this isn't
It's like
about
a slow game.
It is
Oh, wow.
incredibly slow. It is lethargic. So you play as this hitman. He's not retired. He's active, and it's in Paris, right?
That's kind of interesting.
And
yeah.
the game comes in two parts. One of them
Yeah.
is the action part of the game,
Okay.
where it's guns
Yeah.
blazing and it's high frequency. Your heart's beating all the time.
Gun
You're
movie.
breaking arms to get guns from people, so you can continue shooting because you can't run out of bullets. Because then people just run up on you and shoot you. You die in one hit. The checkpoints are not friendly. You can restart big sections and just have to continue mowing people down.
Right. When was this released? When was this released?
February 2020. It's pretty new.
It's a recent.
It's a recent game.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then the other moments are you sit down and you're talking to your handler, and there's a little bit of dialogue that plays, and it's just a little bit. You learn a little bit more about going on in his head, and he's just saying like, "Hey, you heard that that Bob died the other day?" And it's like, and the hitman's like, "Who?" And it's like, "You should remember him. He saved your life in the war and whatever." It's like, time just goes by super fast these days. I don't really remember much about the old times. And it's like, yeah, when's the next hit? When's the next one? And it's like, I'll let you know. It's like, I need to do something with my time. And it's like,
It's a movie.
just
Goes
take
to
some
a bar.
just take some sleeping pills. Just in case. Like, I do take sleeping pills. And then and then they say their goodbyes and you get up and you're like, well, I'm gonna walk around now. And you just walk around. There's no direction, nothing. Like, time passes by. You press buttons. You can look at your watch. You can
This
stop
is that
by a movie
Dead
theater.
Space you were talking about, right?
Sorry?
This is that Dead Space you were mentioning, right? You were saying
Yeah.
like there's Dead Space in the game where it just lets you do whatever you want
It just
for a little bit.
lets you do that. There's no direction. You can walk around this highly detailed city block. I wish I took some video of it. It's incredibly detailed.
It looks like it almost gives me a feel of, like, you know, there's a lot of television and media from Japan that showcase slice of life stuff. Like, it just shows like a little bit of you know, shows that are specifically about how people live, you know, like how they go to the store and deal with human. And that's what it gets me the feel of when he's not gunning people down and he gets to that little bar. Is that what it's like?
Yeah, it feels very much like that. You just wander. You're looking for something to do. You're wondering where your next objective is. So you wander into a little bar. There's no one really around. There's a bartender. You sit down. You get a few options of like, give me something strong. That's your only option. The bartender slides something to you. You press another button. You drink it. Then you just kind of sit there. You know, the time slowly passes.
Have you
leave,
beaten this? Have
you
you
walk
beaten
around.
this game yet?
Sorry?
Have you beaten this game yet?
No. It's pretty short.
Okay.
But you have to be in the right mind space for it, because you got to be ready to just be alone for a while and contemplate your life a little bit, because that's what the game is.
Wow.
It is, and then you start understanding, unpacking, like, oh, I'm kind of like him in a way. Is I want to get to the other action beat, because that's where the quote unquote game is.
Oh, yeah.
But the game
That's
really makes
interesting.
you kind of sit and like wonder, like, why am I just so desperate to go back into the murder part of this game when there's this very beautiful city and you can walk around, you can sit in a cafe and do nothing but check your watch. You can go to a clothing store. I went to a clothing store and you can pick out some outfits. You can go try on a jacket and you're like, hey, that looks very nice on you. Do you want to take it home? And then you can say like, yeah, I'm going to take this one. It doesn't influence anything. There's no point to any of it. You can go watch a movie theater. You go there, you go to the next showing. But when I bought the ticket, it seemed like my guy didn't even go to the movie that he was supposed to, because the movie was already playing. And the movie ends and everyone leaves. And you can kind of just sit there until they kick you out.
It's so interesting, because then you know someone had to like program and animate and set.
I'm pretty
all
sure it's
that
one
setups
person. I'm pretty sure it's one person. Yeah.
And then we talked about, like, you know, where you put your energy, and then to put the energy on something like this, it seems like a project you could only do as one person, or like, you know, as like someone that would have control over the project, because you can't pitch this idea to someone.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, how about an action game where you don't do any action for half of it or something, right?
Yeah.
But I do like that idea. That's kind of interesting that it kind of plays on the same feeling of like you emulate with the character, but you're also making him do this kind of weird action, right? Murdering people in the middle of like emphasizing or like figuring out what his life goals are.
Yeah, and that's the part that I'm interested in seeing, like where it takes this, because this is, and I'm refusing to look anything else up about this game until I see it for myself. I just, again, I have to get in the right headspace for it, because this influences what I've always said a lot, in that playing games is different than just watching a game, right? So much of this game is you being in the headspace of this character, and you as a player also having this communication with the developer where he's telling you, they are telling you, no, just be patient and wait for the action time. This game will come on its own time. Just belong to this character for it. Like, give your time over to being this character whose only life is gunning people down when he's called upon. What does he do in his spare time? What meaning does it have? I went up onto a rooftop just to watch the day and night cycle go, because I had nothing else to do in the game. I had seen like most of the shops. I just went and I stood on that rooftop, and you can do small little actions with the character, which is fascinating. So if you press up, he'll turn his head. You press X, he'll turn his back towards the camera. So I did that, and it was that he was looking there. I pressed down so the character would put his hands in his pockets, and I just stood there admiring the day and night cycle of this very nice pixelated Parisian city.
It reminds me of sailing in Wind Waker. You know, like it's like this thing that you're like, why am I doing this? But then when you're doing it, you're like, you have this mood and this atmosphere, like you're actually sailing, and you're like, wow, this is kind of relaxing.
Yeah, but unlike Wind Waker, where getting from point A to point B is the point, you aren't going from point A to point B in this game at all. You are literally waiting time to pass so you can reach 6 p.m., so you can take a sleeping pill, so you can sleep, so that the night progresses faster until you get to a day of an assassination. And then when you go, like, it all kicks off and you're playing the video game portion of it again.
So how does the video game portion feel now that you had to wait? Is there like any difference? I imagine I'd feel like it's gotta have some sort of build up anticipation, or I might even get frustrated.
It's incredibly stressful. It is incredibly stressful. Because you're still having the same walk cycle, right?
Right.
But people are running across. I'll play the video.
Oh, right.
Again.
There's no like special running thing there. Right? You're just like walking, and then you have to shoot them when they get to you.
You never run in this game, right? And I think that's where like the stone Buddha comes from. Is this game is very deliberate in how you spend your time, how you're engaged in your actions. Everyone runs, you never run. Your character never runs.
Yeah.
It's all deliberate button presses, but at the same time you're frantically shooting and thinking, am I going to be out of bullets? Do I need to break an arm in order to get my bullets back? Get different
it's so
guns.
deceiving. Like pixel art is so deceiving in terms of how hard it is, and and like you feel it's good, you feel it's nice, but I also feel like a bunch of artists are always like, yeah, I can do it, it's easy. Go try to do it, okay? One of the trickiest things in art that you can do is to take a complex thing and simplify it. Like, it's so hard, and it takes so much knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So that's what all pixel art really is. Like the good pixel art, like you have one pixel to showcase, like it might be a lever or something like that, or for a character it's like a nose or an eye. You're like, you have one pixel to do that. Like, what do you pick, right? Yeah. Anyways, just a comment about the pixel.
It's amazing how much they do that with so little, like with the button inputs. For example, you have that animation of aiming the gun, right? And the same button, you need to press a button to do that in order to aim and then shoot and maneuver. The same button when you're in the city section and you're walking around, he puts his hand in his jacket pocket, and you see that small little animation, right? And it's quick. He just puts his hand in his pocket and like, oh, is he going to pull out a gun? And then you press X, and then he just folds his other hand, and then he's just sitting there with his arms folded. So instead of shooting, he just folds his arms.
It's like almost like the part of the game is exploring, but exploring like what the game wants you to do with your character here, like when he's not fighting.
Yeah.
Whereas so much of other games is like exploring how you fight, and this one's like exploring how does he live.
How does he live? What goes on in his head? And even when you have like shooting a gun to him is the same as taking a sleeping pill. Like, that's how easy it is, because to you those are the two commands, right?
Right.
It's the same inputs for you.
Yeah.
And that sort of ties into how playing the game is different than just watching it. You don't.
Yeah.
It made such a disconnect. It made such a connection to me in only having 3 buttons throughout this entire game. But with those 3 buttons, I'm sitting in a bar, I'm breaking arms, I'm taking a drink, I'm sleeping in a bed, I'm taking sleeping pills, I'm buying sleeping pills just with three buttons. And it's how minimal his life is. That's all there is to it, and he can kill as easy as he can drink at a bar. And it's fascinating to me.
It's like a little bit of I really think that like games have only really scratched the surface in terms of what kind of storytelling only a game can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like you look at something that only a game can do, you can't really get that Wind Waker experience like in a movie. Like because you actually have to do that kind of action, that slower pacing. Like that's why I always think that we've only scratched the surface, because I think the problem is, like, if you imagine what was the example I was using here? Like, it takes so much to get a game done, period. Like,
every game is a miracle.
Every game is like it's actually quite a technical challenge in terms of a project, and you have to do so much right that, like, it's like saying the US sent a man to the moon, and you're complaining that, like, they didn't have like a radio on there, or like obviously a radio would have been better, but you disregard all the work that needed to get to them to that point in the first place. And so I think for games, because it's so really hard, and maybe the industry just isn't quite good enough to make super consistent games, that people are too concerned with that process of making a decent game to be able to experiment with a further idea of, like, how can we play around with the idea of making our players wait, something that might be a risk to a project. Like, you couldn't have this kind of project in a AAA game because it's such a high risk that, what if people don't get this aesthetic? And I guarantee you people won't. Like, not everyone will, right? So you're already targeting a smaller portion. And we see that in movies too. It's just like, how do you make a more successful selling movies? Well, you tell these kind of stories. And it's usually left to the indie movies or the smaller productions that have less to risk and gamble, but essentially have less fear to experiment. And so I wonder if that's why we always see, like, the most experimentation with gameplay and storytelling in the indie section. Like, you see a lot of that in more indie or smaller, like even Spec Ops: The Line, which is a very high level, like, production, probably AAA, but that's like the only example that I can think of that's really took that gamble on a first-person shooter game that's been able to do that first-person shooter part as well as, like, this gamble on a story. I
mean, my very recent argument would have been The Last of Us Part 2, right?
Right.
A game that the internet seems to hate, but also a game that has all these quiet moments that don't involve the action. The action to quiet moment ratio in that game is probably not the same amount as Arrest of a Stone Buddha, but I also haven't finished it. But I get the feeling that Arrest of a Stone Buddha is deliberately spending those quiet moments. Yeah. But there's a lot of times in Last of Us Part 2 where you are not killing stuff, right? More so than the internet would be led to believe. And I feel that's an example of a AAA studio taking those risks, but also fueling a bunch of money into cinematic moments. Yeah. Whereas Arrest of a Stone Buddha goes against that. It goes the minimalist route in order to try and convey those. And so much of it is not overtly stated. Yeah. Like a Naughty Dog game can spend all this time on actors making all these facial moments in those quiet moments that speak volumes. Whereas the absence of all that in Stone Buddha reinforces the player's relationship more with the character, right?
Right, because he doesn't.
Because you are the actor, you're doing the motions. I'm actively deciding I'm going to put my character's hands in his pocket because I'm determining he feels this way.
And you're really making up the storyline for him in your head.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not telling you anything.
Yeah.
Essentially, like, oh, he's standing there, puts his hands in his pocket. To you, it's probably because maybe you think he's, like, remorseful or something like that. It could be anything. It could be whatever the person.
It could be any small little tick like that. And the fact that it can make those small little ticks, like the choice of the jacket was already very big to me. You can do I want a black jacket? Do I want an olive jacket? Do I want a white jacket? I did not want to go with the olive jacket because it reminded me too much of like Vietnam, like Ranger gear, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, well, my character, it sounded like he was in the army. I don't think he would buy an olive jacket because that would remind him too much of the army. I'm gonna get. Sorry, a really loud motorcycle just scared the crap out of me.
It's okay.
I'm gonna get the white jacket because maybe he's seen too much bloodshed and he just wants to feel clean again. So I got the white jacket, and then he still was wearing it in combat, and like getting it dirty. You could also buy sunglasses, and then I thought, like, no, my character doesn't think he's a badass. He's not going to buy these sunglasses.
Yeah. This is out of line with his character.
Yeah, but these are all decisions that you make as the player, right? You wouldn't get any of this from watching it. You need to be a participant in it.
How was the music?
So good, extremely good.
It seems like it would need to be really good.
It is discordant in a way. At moments, it is soft, and like. I wouldn't say whimsical, but there is almost an enchanting tone of it. But there is
reminds
this
me of Swords
odd,
and Sorcery.
out of tone riff in the guitar.
Yeah.
That belies this sort of like this chaos underneath it. I'm gonna turn on. I'm not sure how I can get you to listen to it, but I'm gonna turn it on in the video. Let's watch the video again, but with audio.
So, overall, recommend this game. Sounds pretty cool.
Again, you have to be in the right mind space for it. This isn't a very traditional game. I wouldn't say it is very fun in a way. The combat is super basic. It is a little bit stressful. It is not quite as snappy as you would hope for it. There's a bit of mushiness and then sort of give in
right.
And how you,
but
and how the
it's an
animation
interesting
works
concept
in combat.
It might be like a bit of novelty, fun to play that.
Yeah, I'm invested in it because I want to see where it ends. I really like the idea it explores, and I think that is absolutely the whole point of it. And it's been recommended to me a lot. Austin Walker pointed at nice. Austin Walker from Vice Gaming.
Yeah.
Who I follow a lot of podcasts, pointed to another person who made a whole list of Steam games to buy, and it's all these very odd little indie hits that hit upon themes that I'm very interested in, like this. So I bought a bunch of them, and this was the first one that I got just because it starts with an A. I went down a list.
It's the first one on the alphabetical order. How many hours is it so far?
It's apparently 3 to 4 hours. I've put an hour into it.
That's actually I actually love short experiences.
Short games are a
don't
blessing.
cost too much, especially as we're older. Man, I just can't like that's as good as like all these games are, like The Last of Us, which I do want to play. It's definitely a barrier just to know how much time that I'll eventually put into it. Right? Yeah, to just because you go into these things and you want to complete it. The same reason it took me forever to watch Spiderverse is that I knew I wanted to find like 2-hour period where I was just gonna focus all on this and I'm in the right mood because I know it's so good, etc., etc. And yeah, so it's hard to find the time for like some of these larger. I still haven't beat The Witcher. I don't think I'm gonna beat The Witcher 3. I think it's just I'm gonna find the story up from a video or something.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting when it's an interesting time that we live right now, because I feel I want to be two different types of gamers. I want to be I'm not going to say gamer. I hate the name gamer. I want to be two types of video game consumer.
No, just say gamer.
I would like to keep up with Destiny and all those social games, Sea of Thieves and all that. All these impossibly lengthy games where you just get together and play with your friends and have a good time. But I also want to play the 1,700 games I have on Steam that are definitely not that definitely say, hey, get into a mind and a space, get to know what I, the developer, want to convey to you through these games. I will always have a soft spot for all those games. Games like Obra Dinn, for example, and Papers, Please from the same creator that played that.
Yeah, Papers, Please. Yeah.
There's this game called Anodyne, which I've seen footage of, and it looks insane, and a love letter to like PlayStation games, while also being very introspective and weird with its story.
Yeah.
That I want to get a hands on, and then at the same time, I have to play Persona 5 at some point, and that's 100 hours. Where you balance the time between that and then doing stuff like this podcast.
Yeah.
how do you consume all that, right?
I think that it's the age we live in. We have to make decisions because we're not going to consume everything. You're not going to be able to play everything.
And that depresses me so much. Because that's just games, right? There's books, there's movies,
it's so true. Like
I want to build Gundams. Books. I have Gundams that I need to build. I have Gundams that are in boxes.
I'm a big fan of that kind of build stuff too, but I do it with Star Wars ships.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. They're just so relaxing to do that though.
I know. That's my podcast time. That's put on stuff and listen to it. But you know what I also like to do when I listen to podcasts?
What's that?
It's play relaxing games like Hard Space Shipbreakers.
Hard Space Ship. So made by Blackbird Interactive here in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen footage of this game. You know, I was actually surprised that they came out with this style of a game. Not that I dislike it, because I think it's very cool, but it's not at all what I thought it was going to be when I first saw it. You know, I thought it was going to be much more focused on the homeworld combat kind of thing that they had going on, because it's from the same like creators, you know, as Homeworld,
Homeworld, Deserts of Carrick.
Exactly.
And people that worked on that game before it was officially a Homeworld game, before they got the license from Gearbox, they were working on it already, because people at that studio have worked on original Homeworld. People like Rob Cunningham, who was on original
a great
Homeworld one.
Reunion for that IP, and then a bunch of like the original developers. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of like what happened with Destiny, right? Like, you know, they got their hands back on it.
Yeah. So Hard Space Shipbreakers
I know.
is a game where you are just a grunt of this big military, not military, like a salvaging corporation.
Yeah.
And you're
the SCV
in
StarCraft.
Sorry?
You're the SCV in StarCraft.
Yeah, basically. And you're tasked with all these ships that you can requisition for your salvage yard, and you just take them apart as you try to pay back literally $999 billion of debt.
So what's the story behind that debt that your character has? Like,
it's just a debt that you take on when you become a contractor for this company, because you got to rent out all your equipment. They bill you for sending you into space. They bill you for the hab that you live in, the air that you breathe, the tools that you rent.
Wow.
The suit that you're inhabiting.
Capitalism at its finest.
You got to pay for your oxygen every time. So every time you go out, you're trying to optimize your time, because you only have a 15-minute shift. And you say, like, okay, here are my main goals that are going to give me the most bang for my buck out of this shift. I need to quickly strip away these parts while trying not to kill myself in the process. Because the ship can depressurize, it can explode, you can hit like a power line, you can die, in which case you die, you got to pay the fee for cloning yourself again so you can continue working.
Right.
And your clone and your next of kin are going to take on your debt, so you better get back out there.
This is like just low-key a horror story.
This is late stage capitalism dooms us all. The video game.
They've essentially recreated like purgatory on Earth then, because if you constantly clone yourself and respawn, that's what this is. This is purgatory where you're just living to die and then to like pay for your recloning.
But there's always hope because you can always just build up your certificates. You can get more high class ships, which have more materials that sell for more, and you chip away at that debt.
Is it like you can get higher class ships that you are trying to salvage, or do you have like a base or something that you use to like carry stuff? Like, do you have your own little ship or something?
You have the hab, which is that area that you go back into and you upgrade your equipment.
Right.
But again, this game is in early access. There are some there's some lines of dialogue that insinuate that it is going to be a 3D area at some point that you're going to be able to walk around in.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
At least
I didn't realize it was in early access. I thought
it is in the most early of accesses. There is only 2 classes of ships available. And they come in different configurations, and of course their threats and layouts are pseudo randomized.
So one thing that I'm really hoping, I have no idea if they're planning to do or not, but man, this game needs the Steam Workshop or something to enable mods. I feel like there's so much possibilities that you can do with mods here. Like, I want to take apart a Star Destroyer. That's immediately what I'm thinking. Right? Like, that's your high class item is like you take apart like the broken Death Star or something.
So ostensibly, the way the ships are built is they're all built with building blocks, essentially.
Right.
They're all put together. So I don't see how, if you can just take those pieces and sort of in a Lego fashion build out a Death Star, maybe it is possible. Slap on some custom textures on that thing. Oh, you got yourself a little Imperial death machine.
I have a feeling that it just sounds in my head like one of those things that I hear people say that video gamers should, or like game developers should do, but it's like way harder than you expected. Like, I remember this one. It was do you remember DayZ, right? That game with like, it's a survival game with PUBG but zombies. Right.
You mean DayZ?
Days. I remember one of the comments was like, wouldn't it be awesome if the guns like had parts that would decay over time? And then you like the model would look different as it decays, and I'm like, holy crap, do you know how complicated a system would be like that, to like have parts of your gun decay and you have to track the level of decay on each model, and then you have to have a different model for each, like this. It's just like, obviously this person just sounds like an easy idea, you just have a little decay, but like you have no idea how difficult it is on the back end to implement this crazy system, and all you get out of it is that it decays, like it goes older. Like, these are the kind of decisions that developers make all the time about how they should spend their resources that people don't really quite see.
These guns decay, for example.
These guns decay. Do they? Do they have like a shelf life or something?
Yeah, they have a shelf life. As you use them, they go down and they start to like crackle and spark and get all this rust on them.
So you can kind of like, first you can like reload it, but then eventually you'll have to replace it entirely.
You can get repair kits, and then you can patch them up.
I hope that they add some sort of crazy storyline to this, where you have to like
there is a
like,
bit of a
save people
storyline.
And stuff.
You start the game off where this guy called Weaver, who talks with a very droll southern accent, gonna take you through the steps of being a cutter.
Oh my god!
And he says like, I used to be a cutter like myself in the day, but that was after the incident happened. Anyway, and so,
the incident. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. He's just stuck guiding all these newbies.
What if this game, right? Just a theory craft here. What if this game took place during a mission in Homeworld? Oh, I would.
Then you look out into space, and then there's this whole armada that just jumps in and starts shooting.
Like,
and
there's
invading.
missions like that where it's like, oh, you have to escort this ship so that it can like dock with this like old vessel, and you have to protect the vessel at the same time. But now you're in the first person perspective. Ooh, that'd be pretty fun.
You can see that sort of the design of the ships is very Homeworld. It's very rectangular. It's very cubic. Yeah. There's definite inspiration there. It doesn't have the license on it. Not sure if it's just they did not want to get it from Gearbox again for this game since it's so separate.
Yeah, or maybe they're just waiting for the official series to come up with the next iteration.
I want. Oh wait,
Homeworld, by the way,
they
is
are
one of those.
are they working on another
I have
Homeworld
no
game?
idea. I have no idea.
I feel that would be a no-brainer. Making
I
Homeworld
would
3
think so
after
too.
Deserts of Karak was
I
pretty
thought so
popular.
too. And man, like, Homeworld is one of those great examples. Like we were talking earlier about Spiderverse and the efficiency. Like if you look at Homeworld, the original series, they did so much with a very small texture budget, and it's you can almost break down that old game in terms of like how you can hack good looks into like with very, very low specs.
Well, it helps that they didn't have to make maps
Yeah,
because it's all in space.
they're all in space. They
You
just
had
have,
to
like,
make
debris
sky
and stuff.
boxes, and then it was all just unit placement and logic. Make the ships look good. You're like pretty much halfway there. I say devaluing the entire art process.
No, I would say like they put their efforts elsewhere. You can tell. You can tell like they put the ship's designs were really, really strong, and like the environments, even though you didn't have a map, you had like that sky space. They were able to show space like quite prettily for like just having like a texture like floating in the background, or like there's a lot of hacks that they did that I was actually really impressed with. And you can see that art style is translated in this new game. Like it's very interesting to see a studio build multiple projects, because you can see the evolution of their own art style and like, you know, gameplay improvements as well. This game, so it's in early access. Do they have any like announcements or plans for what they are going to develop with it, or like what they're doing with it next?
Yeah, they currently only have the first portion of the campaign ready. Their full story campaign, they say, is going to be about 40 hours long.
Yeah. 40 hours. That's a big campaign.
It's pretty hefty.
And
they're going to add more ships, more classes of ships, and also a sandbox mode that dynamically creates a spaceship for you to take apart and just hang out in. And the reason why I brought up this game actually involves that, because, and why I brought it up immediately after Arrest of a Stone Buddha, is there is this sort of tranquil worksman quality to this game that you get with sort of Euro Truck Simulator, which makes it a perfect podcast game.
It's true.
And that was, that's me almost dropping a controller. So someone suggested on Twitter, and I apologize, I'm not remembering names. Someone suggested like putting on Friends at the Table. It's his podcast, also by Austin Walker. You can see I'm a fan. It's an actual play podcast for a tabletop game, and they did one based on The Sprawl, which is a science fiction tabletop game, and it is almost the perfect thing to listen to. Everyone has been quoting this. It's the most perfect thing to listen to, because it's just listening to a small space opera while you're in space, just salvaging equipment. Feels exactly like the kind of content that this space worksman would consume.
Yeah.
And it puts you into this headspace. And even Ryan from work, one of the technical artists, I believe, he put a video on Twitter of him doing like an audio pass in Audacity to add this radio crackle. And then some people are saying like, oh, wouldn't it be great if this was integrated into the game and you could take any sort of podcast
hilarious.
or audio, and then when you get shocked, it would like loop the previous 5 seconds, because your radio does become this game has tongue-in-cheek moments in it, where you have this very twangy country space cowboy music that plays while you're doing it, while you're doing your stuff, and if you get electrocuted, the radio switches to this old-timey saloon music, and you just have to listen to that for a while until your character like just taps on his helmet and it goes back to the space country music.
It would be cool if they like you could sync that up with the podcast.
Yeah.
Like,
or if that's how they told the story, right?
Yeah. Like when I play VR games, I do that. I like listening to podcasts when I'm playing VR games. It's crazy, but I'm like, you know, I'm playing a regular zombie game, but I'm like, I might as well listen to, I don't know, whatever my favorite science podcast is. Like, it's funny that you hit into an interesting type of game. Like, it's been hit in a few different genres, but essentially like Minecraft and Harvest Moon, these kind of chore games, like Animal Crossing. Like, what is it about doing regular life things that we want to do in video games. Like, why is that so appealing? You don't think it would be appealing
It's
if I
the
just
sense
like
of progression.
explained it to you.
It's the immediacy of reward. When I salvage
Yeah.
a ship in hard space, I immediately see, okay, I've made 750,000 credits, and my suit rental and all that cost me 440,000. I made a profit. This is good. Let me go back in there and slowly chip away at my debt. Same with Animal
like the
Crossing.
gamification. They gamificate just because they gamify it. It makes it like pleasurable to do.
But it's also still work, right?
It's still work. Yeah, exactly.
repetitive
Yeah, it's still work.
tasks, which what makes it perfect to listen to a podcast to at the same time.
Yeah, that's really true. Like, I listen to podcasts when I'm doing chores, like doing anything repetitive where I don't need to think about it, but then I still want to think about something, right? And the thing that I'm doing is too boring for me to think about it just completely. Yeah.
For me,
That's
it's
actually
like
kinda
it's
interesting.
driving, it's doing the dishes, it's cleaning, vacuuming, any of that stuff. Putting on a podcast and just feeling like I am progressing in sort of way in that.
Yeah. It's funny how like
it's
I do
satisfying.
value games that I can just listen to a TV show or a podcast while I play. Like, that's not all the games. Like, certain games I have to listen to the dialogue or whatever it is. Like The Witcher, I can't have music on when I play because it feels weird when techno is blaring and you have like a very like romantic moment happening.
Cyberpunk is going to fix that problem for you.
In the background. Yeah. So cool. I've been meaning to check it out. Like I mentioned, my producer's husband works on it, so I've been hearing about it already, and I've been keeping my eye on Blackbird Interactive for a while because I was a big fan of Homeworld and Deserts of Karak, right? Yeah. Anyways,
Karak.
so that sounds pretty cool.
Some of that Karak cocaine.
Give me that space Karak. By the way, the BBI artists are some of the strongest artists we have in the city.
Really?
Like the concept artists is very, very strong in terms of the work that they put out and the team that's with it. Right up there with like maybe it's funny though. Just the bigger studios typically have the stronger artists, and I think like EA has some of the strongest concept or just purely 2D artists that are around. And I think that BBI, for being such a smaller studio, also has talent that like is pretty like that rivals that level.
What makes you say that?
I've seen the concept art, and I've like just working in the industry, I constantly keep an eye out for different studios, and I check out like who's working there, and always comparing yourself to just make sure that you're up to par of the industry. And so I looked at the artwork that they put out during the Deserts of Karak reveal, and their reveal initially was like very, very reliant on their concept art, which was very strong.
Because it was an animatic with mostly concept art with the
like,
with the big carrot going over Rachel.
Exactly. You really gotta have a strong team if you're gonna rely on something like that. I mean, that was my kind of my bone to pick with a bunch of those Sony trailers, was like you're trying to like really, really impress me, but it doesn't like quite hit that mark. So what was the last topic that we were talking about? For some reason I just like lost my train of thought. I'm trying to pick it up right now. Okay, so anyways, what makes me think that it's a strong art style is because they had that trailer, as well as I look at the art profile of the kind of like some of the leads that are working there, and you can it's pretty clear. You can see the chops. If you're another artist, you can kind of there's a very clear, not a clear, but like you get a sense. It's almost like in those like anime movies when they're fighting someone super strong, and like you can just for some reason you just sense this person's really tough, right? It's like you get that sixth sense in art too, where like
when you feel the impact of the fists.
Yeah, like there's a bunch of stuff that a master does that you don't know. Obviously, that's what makes him a master, right? But at a certain point, you can sense that they're doing something that you can't pick out what it is, but it's clearly good because it's like adding to this product, or whatever artwork, their work that they're showcasing, and you get that sense in art in when I looked at the concept artists from the BBI team there, and I don't mean to suck up to them because I want a job or anything like that. It's more like not everyone, like not all the studios have the same like level or need for high level like concept art. A lot of studios, especially in Vancouver, we have lots of mobile studios. You don't need that high level of a polish. You just need strong design decisions more so than super strong execution, right? So anyways, yeah, that's what impressed me. I'm looking forward to seeing if they're ever going to make a homeworld game. Hopefully.
That's a very good point when you consider how deliberate a lot of the direction of those games are. For Deserts of Karak, it had this very like the music they used was very sort of Arabic influenced, I believe. The instrumentation, it's deliberately very slow, very very paced, sort of the way the old homeworld games. It feels like a pilgrimage when you're taking the it's not called the Khaleesi, is it?
I don't remember the name of the ship.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the mother ship, essentially, right?
It's not Khaleesi. It can't be.
Probably not. I can't. Maybe. It'd be funny if it was. We'll have to fact check that.
Yeah. But yeah, that's slow. We're going on a journey across this whole desert, and then we can be attacked or raised any time. It was reflected in the movement of the ships, the pacing of the music, the bright sparks of the intensity of the combat, and the slow lead up in and out of it. And Heartspace has sort of that. They're going for the more, it's so workman, the way it is paced. It starts off with really in a really minimalist and clever way with you signing that contract with Lynx that gets you into debt in the first place.
The $1 billion contract.
And it feels like an escape because the music they put in the background is you feel like you're stuck in this apartment. And there's babies crying through like the door. Someone is playing really annoying techno music. There's a couple having a fight in next door, and you're bombarded with like all this noise while you're reading through the biggest legalese ever. That's you're like scrolling through and like, oh my god, there's all these stipulations and all this sounds very bad. But I got it. I click accept and like tick all these boxes because I want to get out of this noisy apartment. And that's before you even get into the game, and it's just bliss. It's floaty. It moves slowly. You collide with everything, and yet everything is dangerous, and you're so scared to touch anything. But at the same time, it's relaxing. You feel you can put on a podcast and hopefully not cut into a fuel line by accident while you're doing it. It is very. It's such a time and a space, literally. That they put you in that Euro Truck Simulator mood while still being, I'm not going to say more of a game because that feels reductive, but it definitely feels like a curated experience that they want you to go through while also having repetition involved. Whereas Euro Truck Simulator is more of a on and off simulator.
Yeah. Like I always found it like I found it quite, I don't know, like not strange, but rare to see a studio make a game like this. I think it's a good idea. It's just like you very rarely see people make a decision to capture a smaller audience. Like I feel like everyone like sees a big audience, like a battle royale audience, and they just they get too invested in thinking the possibilities of what if I got all of that audience. And
what if instead I had 200 people jumping into a map?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like it's refreshing to see a studio say like we see this genre that doesn't exist, or the space in the gaming world that doesn't exist right now, and then we'll make it for like a smaller group of people that want this type of game. Because who knows, it could be a ton of people that like this kind of game style, but you would never know because no one's gonna take that kind of risk. So it's kind of interesting that they're willing to do it. I'll try it. I don't know how successful it will be since it's in early alpha still.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like fun just to try novelty games like this.
Hey, maybe this is what gets you into Friends at the Table.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Just throw in a little bit of podcast. I honestly love that podcast so much. The people in there are very diverse from different walks of life, different genders and identities, and just
together?
all working together and having a good time playing this tabletop game. It's incredibly wholesome. It's lovely. It is one of the best podcasts out there. So that's Friends at the Table.
Friends at the Table. Okay, I'll check that out. They just play board games and stuff.
They play specifically a tabletop RPG. Called Dungeon World, which is based off of Apocalypse World, which is a very story-driven format
Right.
Every action is more focused on what the character wants to do at the time and what their capabilities are, more so than just gaming the system in a way that D&D can be fun for people in figuring out those mechanics. Dungeon World and Apocalypse World and all those other engines that run it, like the Sprawl, which is a sci-fi version of all that, is more influenced about telling a story, what would make sense in the moment.
Yeah.
Not like D&D where you can make a bear character with a high disguise factor, and because of the rules of that game, that just works, you know.
Yeah, D&D is an interesting combination of almost two different games. It feels like it laid the groundwork for almost all RPG mechanics that we use today.
In video games like Baldur's Gate and all that.
Weird improv sandbox component to it. And then I have been interested in those kind of games that separate them, because not everyone's interested in both of them at the same time. That's probably, I would say, D&D's biggest drawback right now is that people have to invest into both mechanics to really play any game, versus there's a ton of people who just want to do the story stuff, or there's a ton of people who just want to do the gameplay stuff.
Yeah. It definitely leans more into story while also having pretty satisfying gameplay decisions. To me, it's I've run games of Dungeon World before and had a very good time, very inspired by friends at the table to pick that up. Nice. I've had people that customize their own Apocalypse engine style games, and they made whole new character sheets and whole new mechanics that are based off the same basic actions that the Apocalypse engine do, and those have been fun to play in as well.
Nice.
And all that came from friends at the table. It does a very good job of selling it and explaining to you how it works, so really recommend it.
Well, that ends our ad for Friends of the Table.
Yeah. Austin Walker,
I'm definitely gonna check it out. I need no new
right
podcast
now.
while I play Heart Space.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else you want to chat about for Heart Space?
No, I think that's it. Pretty much hit all the bases.
Cool.
All the hard bases.
All of our bases, yeah. Nice. Good job. Good fourth episode.
Likewise.
This is the fourth episode,
I believe
right?
you're gonna be doing an episode of yourself of something very exciting, aren't you?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So I'll be. I've begun to do some esports casting and commentating for the local Valorant scene. I have a good friend, Matt, who is the VP operations of the gaming stadium here in Vancouver. And so this Thursday we'll be casting and commentating our grand finals for this massive turnip Valorant tournament that we had over the weekend. So if you want to check that out, it's going to be at the gaming stadium, twitch.tv/the gaming stadium. And I'll be posting it out on my Twitter, which you can find like in my name down there, KenHaw604. And also, if you want to follow my art, you can follow it on Instagram by the same tag, KenHaw604.
Awesome. And we've also set up an email address for Beyond the Pixel. So if you want to send in topics and questions, you can reach us at beyondthepixelpodcast@gmail.com. It's beyondthepixelpodcast@gmail.com. Then we can take a look at those and promptly ignore them. Or do something with them.
If you have complaints, hopefully things you like, hopefully
things you don't like,
send those emails. If you have complaints, just discard that. We don't need to.
We've received a lot of stuff on Discord of people that have enjoyed it, some feedback from our own personal friends about what can work better, and we've started doing like topics on the other panel, so that's helped us a lot.
If you want to hear a specific topic for us to talk about, shoot us an email. And then we might apparently be uploading to YouTube, possibly.
Yes.
If in the future.
I'm building a home on ye olde YouTube for us to house our stuff, and that's going to have enhanced audio. So you see, when we do it live, I have to take Ken's Discord, but we've been recording on Audacity. So once I sync those up, that's where they're going to live. They're going to live on YouTube in high quality. I'll also replace the uploads on Twitch if you want to follow it there. And eventually, we're still talking about it, but we're going to have an audio version of this podcast, which will have the high quality audio.
Which is partly why you were like vocalizing all the descriptions I was trying to explain on the screen. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that that will be available wherever podcasts are made available. Eventually, once we decide on hosting service and how we're gonna pay for all that stuff.
Cool. Cool.
But until then, that would have been a great time for me to start playing our outro. I didn't, so we're gonna have to spin the wheel a little bit.
Just, jabber, 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 stall, stall while the music comes up.
Yep, it's definitely playing right now. And now, Ken, do you know what the most important part is? You gotta wait for the drop, because that's the part that people come to. Thank you for watching, and you can always find us right here, Beyond the Pixel.